Okay, so today we're going to do a still life. This is when you have a collection of objects that don't move by themselves, and it's different from a portrait that is a picture of a person or a landscape that is a picture of outdoors. We're going to be looking at the Tome dePaola style of drawing. The materials we'll use for this project are a pencil, eraser, a thin black marker, a ruler, some paints, some water, and a paper towel to blot your water. Now, when you're looking at a Tome dePaola style drawing, you'll probably notice that he always starts with a black outline and some kind of outline of a color going around each one of his drawings. The other thing you'll notice is he often outlines his drawings in black and then colors them in. Over here, you can see he doesn't even color it in fully. It sort of fades a little bit. And I don't know if he used paints for these or a paint and a combination of pastels, but you can use whatever materials you have in your house. Okie doke. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to draw some straight lines so I make these borders just like a Tome dePaola drawing. I use the ruler to draw these lines, but Tome dePaola's lines aren't perfectly straight. So now I'm just going to carefully trace over the line, and I'm going to turn that corner with the marker. I will come back to erase those pencil lines. And then, to make it easier, instead of using the paints, I'm just going to use a colored pencil to go ahead and draw that colored line on my frame. So there goes my pencil line. Now I'm going to use a colored pencil line so it looks like Tome dePaola style. See, I didn't even have to use the ruler for this. I'm going to sort of just follow along the black line that I did using the ruler and the Sharpie. There we go. Now I'm going to sit directly across from the two objects I plan to draw, and I'll use my pencil to sketch out very lightly on my paper the basics of this. I'm going to do it really light, so if I need to erase, the pencil marks won't be too dark. Alrighty, so here you can see my sketch. I started with the basic shape of the teapot. I made a nice round line before I did anything else. And then I made another form here. The apple is a very obvious shape. And see these lines from the flower pot? That's what I'm going to erase later on. So I'm just trying to decide after I do the details, like the handle for the teapot and the spout for the teapot. Some of these lines are going to get erased. But you see this line right here? That's my table line. And I'm going to have to erase this little piece because it's behind this flower pot. So now I'm going to get out my marker and I'm going to trace the things that are in front first. And also I made a little mark of where the shadows are because when I was looking at the Tome dePaola book, I noticed he does add some shadows. So I'm just sort of making a plan for that for when I start painting. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to erase all my sketching lines because I don't want them to show through the paint when I paint my flower pot, my teapot, I mean. And I don't need the lines behind the apple. I'm gonna erase these mostly. I just want a little bit of a hint to remind me where I'm going to be putting a shadow when I actually paint that in. Now, the other thing I'm going to draw in is I'm gonna draw little boxes for reflections because I'm noticing I'm going to need to save some white spaces. Do you see how that flower pot has got some reflections on there? That's the trickiest thing, is leaving some white spaces. So I'm going to go draw that right now. Well, I notice that there's some shadows on the side of this teapot. So I think my teapot's going to have two colors, some light red and a shade of the red where I'm going to add a little bit of black to my red for this side. I noticed that when Tome dePaola wants to show form, like the shape of this smock the art teacher's wearing, he started with light blue and then he added some teal blue there, and that sort of gives the idea of shadows. So I'm gonna try that strategy. I just want you to notice that my palette has two colors mixed here. I started with some orange because when I looked closely at the color of my flower pot, I realized it's not just red, but it's kind of a red-orange. So I'm starting with orange and I'm adding a little bit of red there. And then I'm going in to do the painting like so. This is so tricky because remember, I'm trying to leave some of that white for the reflection. So I'm going to be really careful about that. Alrighty, so I decided to use the same colors, only this time I had added a little bit more red from here, and I used another brush to just put little splashes of black paint right here. So I took a dab of this black because I didn't want to mix too much. Anytime I'm mixing colors, I take just a teeny tiny bit. When you have a dark color, you only need a little bit. It's so strong, and look at it, already makes it so much darker. Now, this is my shadow color because I noticed when Tome dePaola does shadows, a lot of times he's got the same color. Like, look at this purple leg in this chair. He starts with the same color, but then he just makes it a little bit deeper, a little bit darker to make it look like it's in shadow. So that's what I did here. Any place I wanted to make it look like a shadow, I just used a little bit of that black mixed in with my red-orange. And if you notice, I started to do contour lines. This is the shape of the teapot because I wanted to make it look round. And I left those white spots for my reflection. So far, so good. Well, as you can see, my apple's a different red. So over here, I was trying to think, well, how am I going to use the red from my paints? That red was so bright. I said, that's going to be too much. So what I did was I said, how am I going to make my red not so bright? And the rule is, if you want to tone that down, go across in the complementary color. I took a teeny tiny bit of green, see right here, and I mixed it in over on my palette way down here. And this is the red I decided to use when I did my apple. If you notice, that apple is not totally plain yellow. You can see in my palette, I added a little green to it, and I just did a very light wash. Not a lot of thick paint, just a little bit, so I can get that tint of the yellow that's kind of greenish. And there's some color theory to help you with your painting. Do you remember back in the book, Tommy's cousins told him not to copy and to practice, practice, practice? Well, there are some artists that don't always agree with that. So in my case, I'm trying to copy the Tome dePaola-Style to see if I can learn something from his. In his style, I noticed he did a wash in the background. That means he didn't completely cover it with paint. So that's what I did here for my tablecloth. I just created a wash. Now a little more about color. You notice the green here is so dark and vibrant. Well, you can see in my palette I added some yellow, and the yellow green was still too bright, so I used my handy dandy chart again, and I said, what's the opposite of green? When I want to tone it down, I added some of that red orange. So that's why that palette looks like a mess, but you can see the colors are all here in my painting. Now it's time to do some shadows here. So I'm starting to mix up some yellow and green again, and see how this green is so bright? That's too prismatic. So I'm going to use some of that red orange. I'm going to mix it in there. And now I've got a toned down green, and that's what I'm going to use to put another layer and just sort of do a wash of a shadow. Remember when I said I wanted to have a little bit of a shadow for them? And sometimes there's a couple degrees of shadow. So if I want to make it even darker, say, oh no, so bright, I'm going to need to get some red in there to get rid of and make it not so bright. Now, this is going to go close to the edge. Nice dark shadow. So it's the same family of colors, but I made it look darker, and I didn't even have to use any black at all. I just used more of the same color, but I made it more saturated. And that is how I'm doing my shadows. Now I need need to think about the background. As you can see, my wall is a dark purple. Now I'm afraid if I use dark purple on my painting, it's going to overwhelm my red teapot. So I'm going to use my artistic license. I'm going to change my mind about what I'm going to use in the background. And I'm going to use an idea I saw from Tome dePaola. Look at his backgrounds. He just did these little patches of color and they're so light. Some of them blend together. So I just cleaned off part of my palette with my paper towel so I can put little puddles of color. And I'm going to put puddles of color the way Tome dePaola did there. Remember we said I am copying his style because I want to learn to make it my own. Alrighty, now I'm going to start. Well, I did a blotch of purple and a blotch of blue. Now I'm going to put a little yellow. That's so bright. I'm going to add some more water to it because I just want it to be very pale. And I notice that's too bright, so I'm going to dull it down just to make it a little bit paler. And see, there's a nice pale yellow. I don't really like those dark spots in it, so I'm going to use my paper towel. I'm going to blot. And I kind of like that, adds a cool texture. So just for continuity, I'm going to use that same yellow everywhere else because it's just a little splash of color to make it look like there's something in the background, but it doesn't take the attention away from that teapot that I worked hard to create. Now, I think I'm going to call this finished. Alrighty, hope you enjoyed this still life in the Tome dePaola style. Your last step is your signature. If you notice, Tome dePaola always signs his with a little heart in front of it. So I'm going to use that idea. I'm not going to use a heart, but instead I put my last name in the bottom and I made a little peace sign. And now I am finished with my Tome dePaola-Style still life. Don't forget to clean up. You must wash out your brushes, wipe them on the side. Maybe you want to blot them a little bit. Lay them down inside your tray. You can leave these colors here in case you want to use them next time. These colors will dry up, but as soon as you put water on them, they will be reactivated. Now, when you're storing watercolors, make sure you leave them open until they are totally dried up, because if you put them away when they're wet, then they'll get all mushy next time you use them. And one last thing, I noticed I have a little bit of green in my red. While it's wet, I'm just going to wipe it out. And all set. Put away your art materials, clean up your newspaper, throw it in the trash, and you are good to go.